another one of our stars here, Sheila. Marina.
Marina, thank you so
Hi.
much for coming. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
When I first saw Marina do her thing, it was on a channeling thing. I didn't know her. I said, this woman is going to be a big part of our community, because there was no doubt when you came in, Marina, into this life that of who you were. You knew you were from someplace else.
Yes.
And you're just developing this wisdom and this gift, and in a way fearlessly, because you're sort of doing it on your own. You don't have like a community really where you are, I guess, and you just have this online community. But thank you for coming forward. And
Well, thank you so much for helping me put my message out there.
Well, yeah, well, I want to do a movie about Marina called A Starseed is Born, as opposed to A Star is Born. Oh, so anything you want to say about Marina, Sheila? I wanted to get.
No, I was actually just getting ready to go off, except for Marina. I've really enjoyed, thank you for the art, and I've enjoyed getting to know you. I cannot wait until to hear what you have to bring forward. So I think it's pretty amazing that, you know, from that Kundalini awakening at 15 to where you are now, it's like, wow, pretty impressive. So I can't wait to hear what you have to bring forward. Thanks so much for being.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much also for being here, Sheila. I absolutely appreciate your work.
Well, I also want to say, you know, it's you're still in human years, very young, if you don't mind me sharing, 21, sure. but the wisdom, and because obviously you're tapping into other levels. So what are you going to share with us today? And what are you doing, a PowerPoint, or you want to talk?
Yes, I'm sharing a PowerPoint, and I'm sharing a little bit of the history of Starseeds.
Great.
To give people like an understanding on the timeline on why this phenomenon is happening, and then I'm going to bring up my metaphysical, let's say, perspective on it.
Great. I don't want to miss a second. So go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you.
Share the screen, right? Do you see?
Yes.
Good. And okay, there we go.
Yes.
And you could go from the current slide, right? You can go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay. So as I said, I'm going to start with a little brief summary on the idea of starseeds, you know, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. This is something that has been an experience for humanity since the beginning of itself, of its own creation. And to understand that concept and how is that it relates to the idea of human origins itself, I'm going to explain. I'm going to go backwards in time, and I'm going to explain a little bit on these ETs that supposedly are the creators of humanity. So as we know, you know, humans are not, let's say, just hominids. We are hybridized species. And so how this happened, it's that an advance of beings, extraterrestrial beings from the constellation of Taurus and Aldebaran, and many other star systems of that same complex and human lineage, came to Earth back like thousands of years ago, and they created what we are now today, the species of humans of Earth. Now, this Anunnaki, there has been a lot of conflict with who are the Anunnaki so far, because when we mention that word, many people think, okay, reptilians, you know, they have that crystallized concept of Anunnaki being reptilians. And that's something that is not correct at all or accurate, because the Anunnaki are a species of beings of many different races within itself, you know, within themselves. And they're primarily human. They are part of that angelic human lineage that many other ET races are part of, that I'm going to be sharing a little bit later, which is a Lyran human lineage, you know. So there are some Anunnaki who are reptilian. There are some Anunnaki who are more hybrid between human and reptilian. They are a little bit in between. But most of them in general, they are not fully extraterrestrial, fully alien, let's say. They are extraterrestrial, but they are not fully alien. They are human like us. And so the reason why they came here back in those years on Earth, it's because they destroy their ecosystems, because they had a lot of inner conflict, inner spiritual conflict, and they were, let's say, obsessed with the development of technologies. And many of their technologies had a lot of, it was mostly based on a mineral and also other materials like gold and monatomic gold. And so it was a really valuable precious metal to them that they overused over the time. You know, they basically extracted all of it from their own minds, from their own solar systems. And so they found themselves lacking this and in the need to pursue this material by traveling to other star systems. And of course, extracting the resources, you know, for their own technology, not just for their own technology or uses, but because they observed that, you know, by destroying the environment of their own ecosystem, by destroying their own planet, you know, the nature of their own planet, they could not exist there and coexist there. So they needed something, they needed some sort of scientific method to heal that and to be able to survive there. And that's monatomic gold, because that repairs the ozone levels, that repairs like the ozone layers of the planet. And they knew this, and so that's why they went forward with, you know, they started colonizing or traveling, let's say, other star systems and extracting this mineral. And one of those is Earth. It's our own very own planet. So that's why they created the human race, because they wanted this precious metal that they found of this planet. But the reason why they didn't do it themselves is not just because they wanted a slave race that will work for them because it was hard work, but because the Anunnaki understand the concept of karma. When you take something of the universe, of a planetary consciousness in which you have not been born, that you have not incarnated in when you have, you know, gone through the process of birth, you become karmically tied to that planetary consciousness because you're not native, you're not indigenous to that planet. So they needed to create a bridge, a medium between the planetary consciousness of Earth and their species, their collective consciousness, that will serve them in a way that they will not directly interact with these planetary consciousness, so that the exchange of energy of getting this material to them, to their own use, to their own self-service, will not be so karmically tied directly to their own genetic blueprint. That's why humanity was created actually for. So they took the native indigenous compatible species of that planet. And that's what we know as the hominids, you know, the Sasquatch, the primitive primates, you know. They were evolving naturally here. They had their own evolution. They were really grounded beings. They didn't have extraterrestrial material in their genetic makeup. But after this process of hybridization or creation of the human race, it's when the extraterrestrial genetics were more implanted into these planetary consciousness of Earth with this hybridization. And so if we look at the word Anunnaki and we look at our own ancient history, An and Ki. An means heaven and sky. And Ki was a goddess of earth, ground, you know, in Sumerian culture. So this word, basically, Anunnaki, means from the sky to the ground, you know. It was, the literal translation will be those who come from the skies, you know. That's why in Sumerian times, these deities, well, these extraterrestrials were honored as deities. You know, they were treated as gods or angels that descended from the skies to basically teach humanity. And so that's what people have a misunderstanding with. They often think that they're a species with one single purpose, which is the enslavering of humanity, and that's true. You know, that was their main purpose. But after, you know, humanity was beginning to enter into a phase of revolution to become sovereign beings, it's when some of them started to, let's say, support humans, as they were now a genetic family. So they decided that they wanted to, some of them decided that they wanted to support humanity and give them the opportunity to become whoever they wanted to do, you know, whoever they wanted to be, sorry. So they became our guides, our mentors, our teachers. And so it's something that I will explain later a little bit more in depth. But as a general concept, there was a subdivision between the Anunnaki species that colonized Earth, you know, or came to Earth. Some of them wanted control over us, and they insisted in us being slaves. They didn't see potential, not potential, but value in us. They didn't see us as superior as they believed they were. And some others actually believed that, you know, we were now their family and they wanted the best for us. So they became, in those Sumerian times, in those ancient civilizations, our guides, our teachers. And that's why it represented like that. You just see this sculpture, for instance, these Assyrian statues, you know, you see that it's a human head with a really big hat and crown, really long bird, and you see the ball as the body of this deity, and then you see the wings. Well, the reason why these deities were represented with a ball body, with the body of a ball, it's because of their own origin, which is the Taurus constellation. It was the symbolic representation, let's say, of that origin that these extraterrestrial creators of mankind, were, you know, expressed. And the wings, it's something that I also will explain later, but it basically represents the angelic human lineage that, you know, that was introduced to hominids, to the natives of the earth, by the hybridization between extraterrestrial angelic Lyran DNA genetics and the hominids, the natives, the primates, you know. And this is what it's represented here. That the history of the human lineage basically states that its origin, it's based on Vega constellation in Lyra. And so many other ETs are part of this lineage, you know. It's a really big, let's say, spiritual lineage that many other beings are part of, like the Lyrans, the Andromedans, the Anunnaki, the Pleiadians, the Serens, the humans now, and many more. Because many of them actually, like, you know, Andromedans, I mean, not Andromedans, sorry, the Pleiadians, you know, the humans are actually the evolution of this Anunnaki. And some of them are the origin of the Anunnaki, like Lyra and more others. So sometimes when we refer to Pleiadians, that's why there's a lot also of mixed conception between Pleiadians and Anunnaki, you know. Because they can be interpreted as the same, they can be called either way, you know, because it's the same lineage, but in different stages of evolution and galactic history, let's say. So I'm also going to talk about the Nephilim giants that are the hybrids between the Anunnaki that came here and humans, and they're called the fallen angels lineage. And they are represented in the Bible as, this set of giants, humans who terrified Earth, terrified humans for a long time, who were really barbarous, who were really, about power, about tyranny. They were really demonic, let's say. And that's because this specific lineage, the Nephilim, are an angelic also lineage, but represented that fallen angel aspect of consciousness, of humanity, of human lineage. It represents the idea of the opposite idea of Christ consciousness, which will be the divine feminine energy, the divine masculine, the divine consciousness, that which is aligned with God, with Christ, So these were also offsprings of the hybridization of humans, Anunnaki DNA and human DNA. And so we can say that humanity is a mix of many different angelic, lineages. We have the Elohim, we have the Nephilim, the Enoch, because again, these were many people. This is a set of many different, spiritual lineages that has been represented and has been placed here in Earth, along history. And so, well, these images represent what I was talking before. The slavery of human race and how, there was this different scenarios in which, they were put to war for the Anunnaki. And so they were rebelling, they were starting to rebel against them. But so let's talk a little bit about so those dynamics of human consciousness and the idea of their in slavery, why that happened. Well, when the humans were created by these Anunnaki beings, they knew something, and it's that if they will give away their own advanced genetic material to another species, that species or race could potentially own their very own consciousness. Not the same, but the very own, let's say, talent, spiritual wisdom, spiritual potential. And they knew that. So they said, well, we want humans that can do the labor for us, that can work for us, that has the abilities, the intellect to understand orders. But at the same time, we want a species that does not have the potential to become independent, to become empowered spiritually. Because if we give away our knowledge, our spiritual wisdom, we give them also the tools to reveal against us and to become sovereign species. And a bunch of them did not want this because they benefited a lot from us, especially the reptilian human hybrids of the Anunnaki. And so that's why they deactivated on purpose aspects of our DNA so that we will become lower density beings, that we will disconnect ourselves from our higher mind, from higher consciousness material, so that we will be, with our reality, our matrix will be created and generated out of fear. It will be created and projected based on fear-based belief systems. And so this reptilian genetic material will be enhanced on purpose by them, because the reptilian mind, it's what we call the survival, brain, the survival mentality, as indifferent to the creator mentality, which will be the Christ consciousness. So, we have the survival mentality, the reptilian brain program, which is based on survival. It's larger consciousness. It's the dynamics of victim versus abuser. It's the dynamics of attack and defense. It's the responsible for the fight or flight response mechanisms of any organisms, and it's basically vibrates at the state of being of I am the victim of my reality. That this is the reptilian brain program. It doesn't mean all reptilians operate this way. That's not how it works. They have their own evolution of consciousness. They have more aspects to their mentality. But this is what I mean with reptilian brain program. You know, it's the survival mentality that they enhance on humans by deactivating those codons that connected us with our higher mind and put us into the state of survival by not understanding the mechanisms of reality itself, how the universe works, how consciousness works. Now we will be placed in a state of basically thinking that everything that is outside is not our own responsibility, it's not our own creation. We have to survive it because it has been given to us by an outside force. So that's basically what they wanted. They wanted that mentality that was unaware of the ability that we have to create our own reality, so that we will be, let's say, immersed into these dynamics of polarity consciousness, you know, because many of these beings who are selfish to self will fit energetically from us, you know, by the generation of these polarity consciousness energies of fear-based beliefs, you know, fear-based emotions. And so with the creator mentality as opposite to the survival mentality, which is the one that they didn't want to activate, to awaken to connect to, we have that the physical mind and brain translate higher mind frequency signals. You know, it's like more conductive, you know, to that connection, that natural connection between the higher mind and the physical brain. Because, you know, just because we're operating in the survival mentality with, you know, more of the physical brain doesn't mean that the higher mind is not there. It's always there. There's not a disconnection, but there's a disintegration of perception from it. There's a disintegration of it, you know. It doesn't translate much of that higher mind frequency signals as much as the creator mentality does, basically. It's a total, let's say, program at all, a totally different program on way to operate, you know, for our consciousness, you know. So we have that also, that polarity consciousness is integrated. Everything that is the shadow consciousness is put in balance, it's put into integration. It's aligned with unity consciousness because, again, they wanted that separation between humans and between humans and humans, you know, between different races, between different cultures, because unity consciousness is a shift when you integrate your own polarity energies, your own shadows, you know. It's reflected with your relationship, direct relationship with the collective, you know. That's why when you awaken, when you go to the presence of integration, you know, you need to deal with your own shadow consciousness to be able to deal better, to be able to connect and harmonize better with other aspects of you know, the collective, you know, and vibrate and align with unity consciousness. It also is responsible of, I mean, it's also aligned with spiritual responsibility because, again, it's the mentality of the I am the creator of my reality. That's how it operates. That's the state of being that it operates through. You know, it's the, let's say, awakening or total realization that you are the creator of your reality. And that's what they didn't wanted us to know. As opposed to, of course, the other positive Anunnaki who decided that we were their family now, and they wanted us to be guided by them. They wanted us to awake that potential that they gave us in their own genetics. And so how they did it is that they pursue this enhancement of that awakening of those angelic, let's say, godlike consciousness, Christ-like consciousness, by basically creating civilizations like Sumeria and many others, in which they will be represented as teachers, guides for us, and they will hand out to us their knowledge. Like, for example, in many different symbols that you're seeing to the day of today in the New Age communities and spiritual communities in many different cultures and ancient civilizations around the world, like the Caduceus, for example. And this is something that I want to talk because it relates a lot to spiritual awakening of a starseed, you know. Well, the Caduceus literally represents the Kundalini awakening, you know. The snake, it's a symbol that represents knowledge. And that's why it has been heavily demonized in some aspects of our Bible and history. It was a manipulation from the negative ones so that we will see knowledge as, you know, something to be sinful for, you know, something that is a sin, you know. It was a brain programming, telling us that if we will eat from the apple, eat the apple from the tree of knowledge, we will be sinful and we will go to hell. That was a programming. Actually, this is the snake represents knowledge, and it's represented in the caduceus because the two snakes intertwining themselves along a spine represents the feminine consciousness and the masculine consciousness energies intertwining and harmonizing and ascending around the spine of our chakra system from the below to the above levels. That's the awakening. That's the process of spiritual awakening, of, let's say, Kundalini awakening. The integration, it's a constant play of dualities between feminine and masculine until they actually harmonize to a point in which they become integrated. And it's when you experience that symbol on the upper part, which is that sphere that's representing the pineal gland, which is connected to the third eye. It's the eye that sees it all, it's the eye of Horus. It's the eye of, intuition that sees beyond dimensions, but not just in a physical sense. It's not so much about physically seeing things, like a, psychic ability. It's like the idea of actually perceiving your own multidimensionality, perceiving higher dimensional consciousness or interdimensional information. And so when that is activated and those energies of the masculine and the feminine ascend and harmonize along the spine of chakras, activating all of them from the below to the above, then is when we see these wings, Well, these wings represent what we call angelic consciousness. And why angelic? Because angels represent this specific frequency domain of the Christ consciousness. That's why they have always been always been represented as to be the right hand of God, the closest to God, the messengers of God, because they had such an integration of what it is in Christ consciousness that they were actually expressing this very right thing. They were the angels, they were the ones who were closest to God. So this is exactly what is meant to represent, that when you go through that process of Kundalini awakening and integration of your shadow consciousness by balancing the masculine and the feminine, integrating the shadow, bringing the unconscious back to consciousness, is when you not only activate your third eye, your pineal gland, but actually you grow these wings that represent the brain hemispheres. One represents the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the creative, it's the meaningful, it's the feminine, and one represents the left hemisphere of the brain, which is the masculine, it's the logic, the structure, and so when both of those consciousness, those energies, aspects of consciousness integrate themselves, you have this connection, you have this vision, an alignment with that Christ consciousness. Let's say you wake up your wings, and you can express that angelic energy. And that's actually why these Anunnaki beings represented as deities, they actually also express these wings, because not only because of the angelic human lineage that they're part of, because of this thing that I explained about Christ consciousness, angelic consciousness. And so right here in these moments in history, when, we were being hybridized and we were being guided by these gods, it's when the project Starseeds started happening, because many souls around the system, around the galaxy and many other galaxies that were also part of these angelic human lineage, they observed that we were, now because we received these Anunnaki genetics, they observed that now we were galactic family, that we were part of their own genetic lineage, And so thus we also get in our heritage their own genetics, because the Anunnaki have a, long range of history, so they contain deep connections to many different races, themselves, But we received, we received in many different ways, not just through the Anunnaki, but we also received these other extraterrestrial genetics, from many different beings, like the Syrians, the Pleiadians, the Anunnaki, the Andromedans, the Orion people, the Draconian. Many others were also part of that experiment, of hybridization of the human race, the creation of the human race, but how we got certain lineages that were not part of the Anunnaki, like the Draconian, for example, was through the Saurian DNA that was actually also was part of the planetary consciousness, because humans were actually coexistence with dinosaurs, at some point in history, it was all here, so we have this genetic makeup of 22 different races and extraterrestrial species and races. And so Project Starseed happened and started, because these beings saw humanity as having not only genetic connection to their own species and planetary consciousness, but also having potential to heal and become some sort of like project, it's like an experiment to integrate, to come together, for all those lineages that were part of the Anunnaki, let's say lineage, angelic lineage and Lyran lineage, for all of them to come together into a point of convergence, which is the human race, and so thus they will be able to, they had excitement to bring their own consciousness to be part of this process of liberating humanity from the dark aspects of this, human history, Anunnaki history. They wanted that aspect of that lineage, specifically when we're talking about the fallen angel lineage aspect of our DNA, the Nephilim DNA from Orion and, Polarity consciousness. They saw a potential on it, they saw the potential to, activate more of that hypersapient energy consciousness from the future and from the past and from the present. They saw the opportunity for them to, by incarnating in this species that we are, human race, to bring their own, let's say, consciousness, spiritual consciousness from their own star system, and given their own piece of a puzzle, their own little grain of sand, so that humanity will get assistance, from these aspects of itself, because they are not different. They're not, the beings that will incarnate will not be, let's say, heavily different from in genetics, in their own spiritual genetic lineage, from what they actually contain within themselves. We're talking about the fact that now they're a part of it, so the only souls that could incarnate will be souls that will be compatible with those genetics. It's just that the starseeds will be the ones who will have this connection, more of the connection to the higher aspects of that consciousness of those lineages. So they will come here to activate it and integrate the lower ones, the ones resonating more with the fallen angel. And that's why the Nephilim, which represents the fallen angel, has been so associated with Orion people, with Orion genetics. Because in Orion, the Anunnaki, beings of this spiritual lineage, it's when they explore the most amount of polarity consciousness. And when many of these polarity consciousness aspects of our history were being represented, it was the idea of tyranny, it was the idea of power over others, it was the idea of suppression, oppression, hate, separation, division. All of these things were heavily explored, in the Orion constellation, in the Orion system, by the Anunnaki and all of these lineages, So when it was given to Earth, we also got, as in our heritage, those frequency patterns, those aspects of consciousness that were not put in balance. That's why humans have this, duality between being good beings, Chris consciousness, being, heart base, but also they have this reptilian part. They have this fallen angel side. We can't become mean, we can't become evil, or wanting align with power, align with material, obsession with the material instead of the spirit, the non-material aspect of our consciousness, which is the heart, the soul. That's why, because all these things are, you know, merging together, like they're converging together on Earth, and that it's creating this heavily polarity consciousness system, you know, this heavily, like, let's say, big a spectrum of different frequencies, of different aspects, you know, of this big human, you know, lineage along our galaxy and many others, you know, the Anunnaki. So that's why Project Starseed started, you know, and we have here the example of many different ETs being part of the experiment, connecting to us because now we're family, and, you know, the souls that will incarnate will have to be compatible with their own genetic material, you know. So they see us as, you know, related to them genetically and spiritually. We're one big family. And so humanity is a big hybrid experiment. And so when this project started to happen with this, when these souls heavily incarnated into Earth, you know, to bring their consciousness, you know, to bring their knowledge, you know, we have these specific civilizations like that we know as, you know, Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, all these different, the Mayans, Egypt, etc. All these ancient civilizations are the product of extraterrestrial people that are part of our galactic family, you know. So for example, Lemuria, it's a civilization that was intensely guided by the Pleiadians and by the Arcturian people. And Atlantis was really influenced, for example, by the Syrian people and the Arcturian, the Pleiadians, you know. They left, let's say, their own aspects of consciousness in many different ways in our template reality that you just, that it goes far more than just genetics, you know, the just symbols or technology or what are the very own system, economical system and political system that these civilizations acquired or were taught, you know, that could, you know, potentially work, you know, for the collective, were given by these ETs, you know, through starseeds or through them guiding us, you know, from the higher realms in many different ways, or even physically landing here and giving their knowledge, you know, teaching us. It's how eventually we activated and expressed more of, enhanced more of these genetics from these other extraterrestrial beings, you know. And so, you know, what happened is that there's something called the human root races, that is the ancient, let's say, races of humanity that we have not, that we forgot over time, you know. Human history had a range of many different stages, so to speak, and it's represented in the scheme as, let's say, root races, you know. We have the plural race, which was the beginning. We have the Hyperborean race. We have the Lemurian, we have the Atlantean, and we have the Aryan, and all of them are subdivisions of each other, you know. They start to evolve from the one that is, you know, behind it, you know, behind the other one. So let's say that these civilizations, these races were called really advanced races. They were called advanced human races because they express, you know, really intensely this genetic potential that we had as sons, daughters and sons of the Anunnaki, which is royal lineages, it's royal blood, it's angelic, you know, consciousness. It's really ancient and, you know, spiritually advanced, you know, genetics. So the product of this extraterrestrial people guiding us, incarnating as one of us, as Starseeds, you know, it's what resulted in this different set of human super advanced races or civilizations, you know. And so we eventually were making that process, you know, of getting into the, let's say, integration, total integration of all the potential, the unlocking of the ultimate, let's say, highest potential of the human race, you know, as sons and daughters of gods. But, you know, what happened, it's that the fallen angel aspects of humanity that I was previously talking about, which is the Nephilim, the dark aspects of our genetics, the lower frequency astral aspects of it, and the lower frequency density, vibrating in fear, representing our limiting belief systems or fear-based belief systems, from karmic stages of evolution of this Anunnaki race and species. They started to, let's say, also activate to a point to be enhanced, by our own means, to a point in which that contrasted or let's say, made it so that our connection to Christ consciousness or highest potential was diminishing. We were going to make the shift towards the fourth density back in Atlantis. But because of this, race in tyranny, raising power over others, raising, the cult for Lucifer and Satan in many different negative groups, of these civilizations, because of these, well, that's narrative, but really what was going on spiritually is that we decided that that aspect of polar consciousness that we were beginning to integrate was now starting to rise and, go back to this integration. We enhance more the focus on the material world, on the technology, the development of technology, and we lost that connection to the heart space. So, there was this division, there was this tension, there's a spiritual tension in between that made it so that we will not shift eventually to the 4D. And so this is what happened as a result. The Earth cataclysm events. Environmental catastrophes manifested on Earth as a reflection of the next full shift on Earth. And so, this catastrophes that we know as the big tsunami in Atlantis and the deluge, this was the representation or reflection of our own unresolved spiritual conflict in between that wasn't put back in balance, that we didn't reach to put fully into integration, by the race and tyranny and all this karmic pelagic consciousness, So that was the representation of it, that those energies moving within all of us, inside of our world, of our inner world, expressed as, narratives in our human history as the deluge, the big tsunami, all these catastrophes that wiped us, all those civilizations, so that, from chaos, we will be able to create another order. That's one of the hermetic laws, that we were taught about, that the natural rhythm of the universe, it's that from chaos, another harmony is created. So that physical expression of chaos, of the tsunami, the deluge, and all these different catastrophes was like the reflection, the physical of this specific spiritual process that we went through inside of us to create from chaos and destruct what it was already destructive, already not being to reach its higher potential, but staying in pelagic consciousness, to create a new, let's say, order or a new harmony with ourselves. It was like a wipeout, like a reset to start again from zero. And so it was a pole shift event, such as the now happening now. It was the era of the Piscean era. It's the age of spiritual exploration of pelagic consciousness and intense transformation and change. It was another opportunity that was given to us, another evolutionary cycle of energy that was given to us, an opportunity to deal with all these energies that we didn't make to integrate, on those times of those, times and dates in history, in human history. So as a result, we had the spiritual degeneration, pelagic energy is coming back to the surface of our narratives, of our civilizations. Sorry. Yeah. We have our DNA became more dormant, and our sun started to become less intense. And what do I mean with this? Well, the sun is our guide in the evolution of our civilization. of the human race, because we are part of that system, the planetary consciousness of the Earth. It's part of the solar system. It's part of that fractal structure of consciousness, you know. So that bigger collective that we know as the solar system. So the sun is the center of that, you know, it's the center entity of that fractal structure of consciousness, of that collective, of that, you know, concha. So the sun is the one who informs other planetary consciousness, other fractals of itself, like, you know, all the planets that we know, our solar system, Mercury, Earth, Venus, Mars. It informs by the radiation of solar activity of what's the next step, you know, in our spiritual evolution, in our next cycle of energy. It's all ruled by cycles of energy. So these solar events of flashes, you know, storms, solar radiation hits our electromagnetic field, as we know, the Schumann resonance and all of that. It hits our electromagnetic field with its own radiation, electromagnetic, you know, radiation, informing us of our next step in the human, I mean, in that planetary consciousness evolution, spiritual evolution. Because in those light waves that we got from it, it's encoded really complex information, really complex frequency patterns, informing our genetic matrix of what's the next thing that we need to integrate with ourselves to move forward, you know. And this information we cannot yet understand consciously. Our brain does not have the potential to comprehend consciously, but it doesn't matter because we absorb it anyways, because we're empathic, because higher aspects of our consciousness integrated. And we naturally download it from higher dimensions to our physical vessel, because we all know how to translate that. Even if we're not aware of the process, we are always in communication with those higher aspects of our consciousness and translating it in many different ways, you know. So at that time, the sun events become less intense because, you know, the DNA become more dormant. That's why there was less, let's say, incarnations from starseeds, from people who will come with, you know, the material, you know, the energy, the purpose, strong purpose to initiate this process of awakening. So, you know, we were given space and time, let's say, by the universe to deal with that which wasn't dealt at the time. And so now what's happening, it's the pole shift event of the Aquarian era. There is an event, which is the pole shift, and there is this event that we know as the Aquarian era, in which we're going to be aligned with the Aquarius constellation. And this alignment represents a really specific cycle of evolution in our planet, or let's say era, you know, period of time, because everything functions on periods, on, let's say, cycles of energy, cycles of evolution, you know. So this is the one that we are shifting to right now. It's the time, you know. That's why sometimes it's said that things are written in the stars, because the stars, how the astrals, let's say, connect to each other. That's actually a map of structures within our consciousness, of symbols that connect with each other. You know, one entity, one planet, one star system, one constellation representing one thing, one symbol within our consciousness. And so all of those different symbols, you know, represented in stars or constellations, the, let's say, geometrical pattern of how all those symbols connect and interrelate to each other and create, you know, let's say, generate in a specific position, you know, create this geometrical pattern, you know, by its place in the universe. That is creating a system, you know, within ourselves that is reflective, you know, of all those symbols within our consciousness, you know, expressing a different idea, a different state of being, a map for our consciousness of how it relates to itself, you know, the components of consciousness, how they relate to itself, you know. So astrology is far much more than, you know, than that. It's like a map of consciousness. It's a reflection, literal reflection of the structures within our consciousness. And so what's happening right now, because of this pole shift, because of the era and the period that we're entering of Aquarius, we have massive solar flash series of events. Starseeds are beginning to incarnate, which started around 1980, and even before that period. But around that age is when it was a massive phenomenon. Again, as everything is non-linear, starseeds observe this period, to be highly relevant to the evolution of our own galaxy. When we see these events, with series of event of awakening and all these a series of events in human history, like Atlantis, blah blah blah, we see it as a linear thing. We see it as a history that is like expressed in a linear way, in a linear expression, and we think it's just like that, that there's it goes one after the other, and that's not actually how it goes. Of course, that's a general, let's say, connection. It's what makes sense, linearly speaking, but it's not really like that. So for instances, many of starseeds could incarnate pretty much from the future, coming from the future right now, because of this event that is going on Earth, because the Earth is entering right now in this, let's say, process of awakening, process of activation. So that opens up, that makes it so that this planetary consciousness projects from itself many different timelines, depending on the quantum probabilities of itself, to express one spiritual timeline or another, one timeline or another, one history or another way of going forward with the history of our species. And that's why many star systems have so much interest in this, because they're part of our lineage, they're part of our spiritual lineage. And so what it happens on Earth, it influences what it happens also to them, because they're part of this history, they're part of it, and they're part of the same galaxy, not only the same human lineage, but also spiritual lineage, but also part of, this is structure, this fractal consciousness structure of our own galaxy, which is the Milky Way, and all many others that are connected to us. So because of this specific shift on Earth right now, many different timelines are converging, and many different timelines are being projected in a diverging, let's say, expression or structure. So, there's a lot of interest right now from many different ETs, many different races, to be assisting us for the best of the galaxy, for the best of this long history of what it's the human race and this spiritual lineage of the Lyran human species, the Anunnaki, the Lyrans, Pleiadians. Sun energies start mutating our DNA, new genetic codes and combinations activating. This means that, we know that radiation mutates DNA, but this kind of mutation is a positive one. The radiation from these electromagnetic solar flashes of energies from our sun star, it's making it so that our DNA, it's let's say enhancing the mutation in our DNA structures, so that new genetic codes are awakening, are being activated. Many different combinations are started to be, to be expressed within the human genome, within human matrix, of genetics. So that's what we have here represented as the great solar flash. So we know that stars are awakening, but let's see now from the metaphysical explanation. We have the starseed DNA, okay? And so what we know as starseeds so far, what we have always perceived of them, it's that starseeds are souls that incarnate here, and they, by incarnating, they're just expressing this, extraterrestrial consciousness, because they have a different origin. Well, that's the general idea of what they are, but there's a metaphysical perspective, deeper perspective to it, and it's that when a being incarnates, when a soul incarnates, there is a hybridization between the soul DNA and the physical DNA of that same lineage that the soul is incarnating into. So when a starseed is incarnated as a human being, there's a merging between their own soul DNA genetics and the genetics of that vessel, that they're acquiring. So if the soul is a starseed, it's the soul of an extraterrestrial consciousness, or an entity that has, let's say, greater percentage of extraterrestrial genetics. When there's in this incarnation, that offspring, that being, that baby, it's born expressing more of that extraterrestrial aspect of the human genome. That's why starseed souls activate certain extraterrestrial genetics with higher frequency blueprint when they incarnate special bloodlines. And why I say special bloodlines is because generally those bloodlines have a higher rate of extraterrestrial DNA, so they are more compatible with the soul DNA of these starseeds. It's a matter of compatibility. But either way, as a result of that incarnation, higher conductivity and connection with higher dimensional and extraterrestrial consciousness is expressed, So let's say that certain souls, because of certain starseed souls, because of their genetics, they can activate certain DNA of those special bloodlines that perhaps generations ago were dormant, because the souls incarnating were dealing with other processes of, transformation and integration, And so there's more connections to life as extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional consciousness. This means that because time is not linear, the beings that we know as a starseed, the difference between human entities, human beings, is that the starseeds are actually connecting more in time and space to aspects of their incarnations that are more extraterrestrial. Instead of informing themselves from lives as a human being, they are informing themselves more from lives of themselves as extraterrestrials and extra-dimensional. So they download higher consciousness from those connections, as a result. And to finish this presentation, I'm gonna talk about their mission. And so I'm gonna give a brief summary of who are the star children, who are the starseeds that we're talking about. The star children are the indigo children, the crystal children, and the rebel children. And all of them are different frequency signatures, generally expressing a higher dimensional spiritual consciousness of the higher frequencies of the color spectrum of light, each assembled and structured as archetypal energies or blueprints for assigned specific spiritual purposes and missions to be of service and assistance to the awakening of planet Earth. We have the indigo children, which are the spirit warriors, the archetypal energies, the spirit warrior archetypal energies, revolutionary, etc. Generally, the indigo children are here born with that spirit warrior archetypal energy, because they are here basically to shatter, the old paradigm of human consciousness of the collective, to shatter it, to make change happen, to create a revolution of consciousness. And we have the crystal children, that are the ones who are here, coming after the indigo, to crystallize a new consciousness, a new paradigm for human evolution, for human civilization. So they are the peacemakers. They have a crystalline aura. They are here to create a new Earth. They're highly empathetic and sensitive, and they are expressing a higher frequency in the color spectrum of light in their electromagnetic field, in comparison to the indigo, which is the ultraviolet. And so basically the purpose of a starseed, it's the integration of Christ consciousness back in Earth. It's what I was talking about, the Nephilim. It's taking those aspects of unconscious energy and bringing back to consciousness to create what we know as, the new Earth, the 5-dimensional and 4-density Earth.
Wow. If you were doing this live, you'd have a standing ovation. That is amazing.
Thank you.
It's great. Do you want to stop? You can stop screen sharing, but I just think, Marina, I think we want to give you a whole workshop day on Portal to Ascension to just go through every little step to activate that. Isn't that incredible, Neil, the presentation?
That was so good. I'm pretty speechless. Like just the way that you put all that information together and just connected it all to the consciousness and the ancient history. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Marina.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
You know, Marina's first language is not English, it's Spanish. She lives in Madrid, and I think you actually learned English to communicate this sort of message to the world. So
Yes.
you did, right? You came in as a starseed. This is so valuable and so much in key with everything we're talking about that, yeah, Neil, let's give her a workshop, a whole.
Yeah. We'll talk in the next couple of weeks and try to do something longer, I feel. And we can have questions as well with the audience, you know?
I would love.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And you come stick around for the panel. I know it's getting late over there, but stick around. Thank
Sure.
you, Marina. This is like, I'm just giving you a standing ovation myself, okay?
Thanks, Marina. See you in a bit.
Really fantastic. Thanks. We'll see you in a little bit. Yes.
We'll
thanks.
see you in the panel.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.